itself is when it's detective. I'd like you to talk about the PSA testing. There was a recent government group of doctors and lay people, and they came up with the idea that PSA testing is not as useful as, you shouldn't have it. One of the lead doctor on this panel was a pediatrician, a woman. And I know that little boys have a lot of problems with prostate cancer, especially when they're 2 or 3 years old. I mean, to me, and I've said this before, the whole testing thing is very confusing to a lot of guys. And I'd like to talk about that, because I think testing is probably the most important thing that a man can do.
Well, you're right, Ernie. The whole thing about screening and diagnosis of prostate cancer is very confusing, and it's much more confusing today than it ever has been.
Yes.
So we'll just go back a few years to maybe when I was a medical student at UCLA.
Last week. Last month.
And at that time, there was no PSA testing. PSA testing came in the mid to late 80s. And most of the prostate cancer that was found at that time was advanced prostate cancer. And it was many people that had this advanced prostate cancer, it had already spread beyond the prostate, and they weren't amenable to good treatment, because the only way it was detected was with an abnormal prostate exam. So then PSA testing came in the mid to late 80s. What PSA is, it's a protein that you can measure in the blood. This protein is made by the prostate, and a prostate cancer cell makes more of this protein than a regular prostate.
Than a healthy prostate.
Than a regular, than a healthy prostate cell. So that people with higher levels of PSA in their blood have a higher chance of having prostate cancer. And so this led to widespread screening for prostate cancer, just like, we have screening for cervical cancer with a pap smear or mammograms for breast cancer. And there was lots and lots of PSA blood tests done, and then a lot of people had biopsies, and a lot of people ended up having treatment for their prostate cancer. And a lot of these people were benefited by treatment, and the prostate cancer was found early, and it could be cured either with surgery or radiation. Then, so that was, there was a lot of that going on, but then people looked at the data a little bit more carefully, and they said, wow, even after all this, there's a lot of people in this country that are still dying from prostate cancer, and in spite of the PSA thing, why are so many people dying? And they kind of looked at it a little bit more carefully, and they found that a lot of the people with a really bad prostate cancer were still dying from it. A lot of people that had surgery and radiation for prostate cancer maybe did not need it. Maybe their prostate cancer was so slow growing that maybe they didn't need to have major surgery or major radiation. And so that's where some of these recommendations have come from about not doing PSA testing.
But the thing that gets me is this panel that came out with against prostate testing, the woman in charge was a woman by the name of Virginia Moyer. She's a professor of pediatrics at Baylor. And there wasn't one of you guys, not one urologist on this panel. I mean, you talk about, it's like a stacked deck. This is a stacked deck. And what she doesn't know about prostate cancer, I think you forgot before you got up to take your first pee this morning. I mean, I'm serious. She knows nothing about prostate cancer. She's a pediatrician. And little boys don't get prostate cancer. And in my opinion, she wasn't even not only to head this thing, she's not even qualified to broach the subject of prostate cancer. I don't think she can explain what you just explained. What should guys do?
Well, the incidence of prostate cancer increases with age, if you take like 100 guys walking down the street that are 70 years old and you look at their prostate very carefully, you can find a little bit of prostate cancer in about 3/4 of them. Well, by the time you get to 90, it's about 90%. And these people all have prostate cancer, but they're going to die with it. They're not going to die from it. And so some of the research that this woman is referring to has to do with the fact that people with non-aggressive, slow-growing prostate cancer probably do not need any treatment, and they can just be watched.
Well, let's take a guy like me. As you know, I had laparoscopic robotic prostate cancer surgery. It was diagnosed when I was 69 years old. The choices were laid out on the table like a smorgasbord, and I did a lot of quick study very quickly because essentially a guy's on his own, and I chose that. But take my particular case, 69 years old, with the Gleason, I think, was a 4.3 or something like that. If I had not done anything, if I had not been screened, and I've lived afterwards now for 9 years, and you, being my physician, you saw my PSA, which is 0 still, which is good. So 9 years, nothing has happened to me, and I've had this surgery, and hopefully I will die from something else, and the odds are that I will because it's been 9 years. But what do you think would have happened to me, considering my age and my health, had I decided, as these people suggested, to do nothing?
Well, I think that at age 60, with a Gleason 4+3, you were benefited by finding it.
I was 69.
Oh, when you had the surgery.
Yeah.
So being 69 and having a Gleason 4+3, you were benefited by the surgery. And if you did not have your prostate cancer treated, your Gleason 4+3, 9 years ago, this is the time when you would probably be having trouble. And it very likely would shorten your life if you didn't have it treated.
At the time, the cancer was encapsulated. It hadn't spread out of the margins.
Right. So I think you were benefited by PSA testing and treatment. People that have a Gleason 4+3 means a moderately aggressive tumor. You definitely should be treated, and you were.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing you had your PSA tested.
But what happens if a guy has a lower Gleason at 69? Do you kind of watch him? But how do you know he has it if you're not going to test him?
Well, that's the thing. So I think there is a place for testing. Not in a man that's 75. I don't think a man that's 75 does not need to have his PSA tested. But a man that's 69 or 70, usually I think the cutoff is somewhere between 70 and 75. But if you have a non-aggressive tumor, which is a Gleason 6, you probably do not need any treatment. But that doesn't mean you don't have regular checkups and follow-ups. You have to have your blood test and your prostate checked every 6 months. We call this active surveillance. So we don't say, okay, you've got a non-aggressive tumor, don't worry about it, see you later. Very important. You have to come in every 6 months, have your prostate checked, have your blood tested. If things start to move, then you need to have another biopsy to see if you have a more aggressive tumor, if you have a Gleason 4+3.
So if a guy is 75, what you're saying is that by the time the cancer catches up with him, statistically, he's a dead man anyway.
Right. Well, right. I mean, the risks of biopsy and surgery for a 75-year-old man are probably greater than the chances of him dying from prostate cancer.
The other thing I have is take a guy like Hauser, who was pretty young. He was 62, I think. Is there any good reason that a 62-year-old guy should die from prostate cancer?
Well, that's the thing. There are some really bad prostate cancers. You talked about yours was a Gleason 7, 4+3. there are people with Gleason 9 or 10, which are really fast-growing, aggressive tumors that are very difficult.
But what would have happened if you went back 6 or 7 years and he started testing and his velocity, the speed of his PSA points started to go through the roof? Could the cancer have been, in his case, and I'm not, you know, you're not a prophet, but is it possible that the cancer in his case could have been caught at an early stage, early enough to excise it and let him live longer?
You know, I don't know. It might be possible, but it may be that some of these bad tumors have already spread beyond the prostate.
Even right, no matter when you test.
Right.
When should a guy start testing?
You know, I think it's important to have a PSA around, a baseline PSA around 40, and then maybe another one around 50. And then if it's very low, it can be done at 55. If it's not very low, then every year, starting around 50.
And can you talk a little bit about the history of PSA screening versus the death rate of prostate cancer since PSA has been brought into the picture versus before it came up?
Well, you know, that's the thing. I can't give you the exact statistics. There is a little bit of a decrease in deaths from prostate cancer since PSA has been testing, but not a lot. Not as much as we would have thought.
And what do you, as one of America's great doctors, 100 great doctors, but what do you attribute that to with that it hasn't gone down enough as a percentage figure?
And I think it has to do with what we just talked about, that there are some really bad cancers that no matter what we do, keep growing and can cause a patient's demise.
At one time, the New England Journal of Medicine reported that the PSA test had failed to spot 82% of cancers in men over 60. Is that a reasonable number?
I don't know that statistic.
Okay. In men over 50, it was reported that 12% of PSA tests read as false positives and 25 to 30% read as false negatives. Now, can you explain false positives versus false negatives?
Well, like everything in life, there's a bell-shaped curve, you know, and if you make a graph of, you know, prostate cancer and PSA, and there's a curve that looks like this. So there are some people way over here with a high PSA that do not have prostate cancer. And then there's some people way over here with a low PSA that do have prostate cancer. The normal range, when they say, okay, your prostate is normal if it's below X number, is 2 standard deviations from the mean. But there are still some people over here that have very low PSAs that have prostate cancer. And there's some people over here with very high PSAs that do not.
Yeah. What happens when a guy tests false negative? What happens to that man? I mean, you don't find anything, but he has a problem.
If someone's PSA is high and, you know, their life expectancy is felt to be greater than 10 years and they have a biopsy and their biopsy is negative, it doesn't mean we say goodbye, see you later. We tell that person, you need to be sure to come back in 6 months. We do another PSA, we do a rectal exam. And there are some other newer tests that sometimes are helpful, and we might recommend a second biopsy if it keeps going up. There's some new things on the horizon and some things we do now. MRI has been found to be a little bit more specific in looking at the prostate to find prostate cancers. And there are some new molecular markers, new blood tests that are going to be coming that are sort of in the pipeline that aren't available right now that will be more accurate than PSA.
Do you think that some of this new stuff that's coming down the pike will eventually supplant PSA and be more accurate and do a better job and even impact the mortality rate even more in a negative?